In this series, we're going to talk about balance, repetition, pattern, and rhythm. Let's start with balance. So when we talk about balance in design, we're talking about compositional balance, visual balance. So a balanced composition looks right. It looks stable, it looks aesthetically pleasing, and that's because the human brain has an innate basic understanding of basic physics, as we have discussed. We know when we look at something whether or not it is right within the world. We can look at an image or a scene and know instinctually that it does or doesn't make sense visually. And so as a result, balance in a work of art is essential to making your work look believable, even when it's not. For example, this levitation photograph by Christopher James, he does a lot of these. At first, when you look at it, the whole is aesthetically pleasing because he has applied the principles and elements of design. But seconds later, after you have stopped seeing the whole and start to see the parts, you realize something is not right. And this woman is in this awkward pose that defies the laws of physics. Now, of course, he balanced her on an object and then cropped out in Photoshop. He took out whatever she was balancing on. But this is a great example of how balance in a composition can make the composition visually balanced even when we're defying the laws of physics. So this is an example of breaking the rules the right way. Okay, so there's this reactor house that spins 360 degrees. It's a house, but it's also meant to be a performative series that was created by these two artists. I'm not sure how that would go, how fast it spins. It may slowly spin. It would be very interesting living in a house that spins, isn't it? But, again, that's the whole purpose of art, right, is to get us to think. So while some elements might be focal points to attract your eye, no one area of the design draws your eye so much that you can't see the other areas, or should, right? So you should not have a focal point that's so overwhelming and so dominant that your eye never leaves it. Balance in a design involves arranging the positive elements and the negative space in such a way that no one area of the design overpowers the others. Everything works together and it fits together as a seamless whole. The individual parts contribute to their sum, but don't try to become the sum. An unbalanced composition can lead to tension. When a design is unbalanced, the individual elements dominate the whole and the composition becomes less than the sum of its parts. This building, this residence, is a very beautiful example of balance. Even though the right piece looks like it's floating in space and can become visually heavy because it's higher, it's balanced out by the anchor of the space to its left. And also it creates the symmetrical S shape, and that is also an element of visual stability. Balance in the physical world works exactly the same way in visual design. So on the top, the seesaw, they are equally weighted, therefore equally balanced. What happens when we allow physics to play out? They're going to balance. Neither one, unless they start jumping, right? And then they may, and they start jumping and they still teeter back and forth. We have symmetry that is maintained about the fulcrum, and this is the fulcrum. In the second image, we know what happens if we let this situation play out. The seesaw is going to tip to the right, and the little guy is going to be stuck up in the air. And we've all seen this happen on the playground, right? Big kid does it to a little kid. Little kid stuck in the air. Usually crying follows. So Look what happens on the bottom if we move the big kid further in. We now have achieved balance by moving him closer to the fulcrum. Visually, it works the exact same way. Because our eyes assign weight to objects, visual weight, it works the exact same way. And we just kind of talked about all that. So our visual balance is similar to our seesaw. Physical weight is replaced by visual weight. The direction in which the physical weight will react or act is replaced by visual direction as opposed to physical direction. Therefore, visual weight is the perceived weight of a visual element. It's a measure of how much anything on the page attracts the eye of the viewer. People look at Mondrian's rectangles and think, oh, this is simple, that's easy. It's not. Minimalism is quite hard because he had to balance them. And he did it perfectly. Now, this is just a piece of the overall design, but he did it very well so that everything looks balanced and harmonious. Change anything and you upset the balance. And that's hard to do. Try it. Take one of his works and change things and see what happens. So visual direction is the perceived direction of a visual force, such as the force of physics, gravity, right? If we throw something, we know what's going to happen to it. If we put a bigger object on a smaller object, depending on what they're composed of, we know what's going to happen. It's either going to crush it or it's going to fall over, unless it's balanced, which, we can do with bolting it to the floor, to each other. Okay, so what this means is the direction in which we think an element should be moving if it were giving a chance to move according to the physical forces acting on it. And so you can see an example here with the three different compositions of the photos. The first one is physically balanced because the taller object is balanced out by the building. They weigh each other out and they balance each other out. The one on the right looks like it's going to tip over to the right. The one on the left looks like it's going to tip over to the left. It's just visual balance. It's how it works. The same exact way as it would if physics took over, but visually. So an unbalanced composition can feel very uncomfortable for the people who are viewing your space or living in your space. And we don't want to do that. In the second of the three seesaw images, it looks wrong. And so it makes people uncomfortable to look at it because that's not how you ride a seesaw. The visual weight is a measure of the visual interest of an element or area in a design. And so in Ando's Church of the light contrasting with the dark creates a beautiful sense of balance in the space. When a composition is visually balanced, every part of it holds some interest, just in different levels. And one of the reasons I put this nursery room in here is because I think it's a perfect analogy. If you've ever been around a group of kids and you say, I have one candy bar and I'm going to give it to the first one that says I want it, they all start screaming at one time, you don't hear anybody. For me, this often happens sometimes in labs when I'm helping a student and other students start, I need help. And it's like, I can't help everybody at once. What do I do? So it works visually too, right? So you can't pay attention to everybody all at the same time. So we need that visual balance within our elements in our composition. So there are four distinct ways to achieve design balance: symmetry, asymmetry, radial, and mosaic. Symmetrical balance occurs when equal weights are on equal sides of a composition. Usually it's called a mirror image. Symmetrical balance evokes feelings of formality and elegance, but it can be static and sometimes boring. This is a beautiful example of well done symmetrical balance that is not boring at all. This has got so much going on. Reflected symmetry or bilateral symmetry occurs when everything is mirrored around a central axis. And you can see that in the image of the facades, the photos taken of the facades over here. The axis can be up and down, left and right. It can even be diagonal. But everything on one side of the axis is mirrored on the other side. That creates that stable, symmetrical balance. Natural forms that grow or move across the Earth's surface develop reflection symmetry, such as a human face or a butterfly. When the reflection is a perfect mirror image, the image is said to be pure. Very few things are. They're almost all man-made. Because if you look at the left side of your face and then you look at the right side of your face, while they're symmetrical, they're not perfectly symmetrical. Most of the time, everything has some slight variation. So symmetry can occur over multiple axes at the same time, as it does here. This image is reflected left to right, but it's also reflected up to down. Now, the left to right is a near mirror image. The up to down is not. So multiple axis symmetry, like a circle, right, is a perfect example of perfect symmetry. So the windows on this building are repeated over and over and over and over. However, the material, the patterning in the material prevents them from being boring by adding variety. Translational symmetry occurs when elements are repeated over and over for different locations in space. Repeating fence posts, windows on a building. Okay. And then you can create rhythm, motion, speed, and dynamic action through the application of translational symmetry. A symmetrical form will carry more weight than a similarly sized and shaped asymmetrical form. But they can, as we've said before, become very dry and boring. Asymmetrical balance is from unequal visual weights on each side of the design. The one on the right is lighter but bigger, therefore it balances out the one on the left that's smaller and darker. So one side, may contain a more dominant element, which the element on the right is more dominant, but it is balanced out by what's on the left. And then radial balance occurs when elements radiate from a common center. Stairwell is a perfect example of that. The middle is always the fulcrum, and everything radiates out of that common center. Mosaic balance results from balanced chaos, and this is a great example. The composition lacks a distinct focal point, and the elements share a uniform emphasis. The lack of hierarchy leads to a visual noise at first glance, but it ends up working together collectively rather than as individual elements. This is an example of breaking the rules. Because we just said always you need a focal point, you need a focal point, you need a focal point. I still think you need an entrance into this building, but that can be at the base. But here's an example of something that doesn't need anything else. It in and of itself is balanced chaos. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue in the next video.